With over 7 billion people on planet Earth, it is inevitable that humans must interact with one another. In several instances, we interact in a way where we become responsible for one another. We often reach out a hand to those in times of trouble, hoping they would do the same were the roles reversed. While the initial idea of people helping people is a great thing, like many great things, there can be a downside. This downside, the white savior complex, or savior complex.
So first off, what is the white savior complex? That is a very good question. So the white savior complex, on a very basic level, is the idea that it is the obligation of the white race to save or to help a non-white race. It can also be understood by saying how the success of a minority or of a non-white group or person is only the cause or result of the white person's help. The purpose of this documentary is to investigate films and how certain films can influence an audience's perception or influence the way they see races represented in society. I would also like to look back on the white savior complex and try to understand why it exists in the first place by looking at its historical roots in terms of imperialism and colonialism. Finally, I would like to investigate how the white savior complex can be interpreted on college campuses through study abroad programs. A really big aspect of our education system today, as well as our society as a whole, is film and media. So a film that I saw as potentially implementing the white savior complex into its storyline is The Blind Side. So The Blind Side, if you're unfamiliar, came out in 2009, and it tells a story of Michael Oher, a homeless black teenager with no education and a past of violence and neglect. One day he is taken in by a well-off white family who provides him a home as well as security. They also get him involved with football, hire him a tutor, for which he begins to excel in school, and eventually he receives a scholarship to an NCAA Division I university, in which he becomes extremely successful, and he ends up being recruited to an official NFL team, and he does phenomenal after that event took place. So first off, nothing wrong with the film itself, and I think it's a phenomenal movie. I think it's very inspiring. It tells a great story about family, achievement, resilience. I really don't think there's anything wrong with that, especially the fact that it is a true story. I don't want to take away from that fact because it is very inspiring, as I mentioned. However, when we flip the switch and look at the film with the white savior complex as our lens, it's a very, very interesting movie to investigate.
In the journal article, Blindsided by the Avatar, White Saviors and Allies Out of Hollywood and in Education, from the Review of Education, Pediology, and Cultural Studies, a group of students from a social justice and government class investigated the film in relation to its demonstration of the white savior syndrome. The teacher had shown this trailer to demonstrate how Hollywood tends to make films based on this theme, that young people of color can escape the predicament of marginalization through the guidance and agency of a lone white actor. While watching the trailer, the teacher had noticed how Sandra Bullock, the white savior in this film, appeared fierce, bold, and eminently determined, while Michael Oher appeared subdued, emotionally withdrawn, and almost developmentally handicapped. When reflecting back on the trailer, the students argued that the movie focused solely on the football player, not the white woman who saved him. While this is true, the white savior complex still significantly prevails in the film, as it shows how people of color supposedly lack the capacity to seek change. Any progress or success tends to result from the white individual, which suggests that escaping poverty or ignorance happens only through the savior's intelligence.
It's pretty clear the white savior is presented with all of these very determined, strong, bold characteristics. Meanwhile, the non-white character, the minority, the person in need, Michael Oher, does have all these deficiencies. Through the white savior complex lens, what we can begin to notice is how Michael Oher's achievements could have never been achieved without the help of his white savior counterpart. Once again, tying in this idea that the minority person or the minority group cannot do the things that they have done without the smarts, intelligence, determination of their white savior counterpart. So why all of a sudden are we trash talking movies here? We are not. I think the movie's great itself. But the fact of the matter is, when we see the film through the white savior complex lens, it's really interesting how the views of these characters from an audience can be replicated into our society and how different races are represented today. Another film that I would like to investigate through the lens of the white savior complex is Freedom Writers. So Freedom Writers from 2007 tells the story of a group of at-risk high schoolers from Long Beach, California, and their interactions with their new teacher, Mrs. Gruelle. The students are known to be unteachable and ruthless. However, through the dedication and pedagogy methods of Mrs. Gruelle, the students begin to develop a strong appreciation for school, as well as their peers, and eventually all graduate high school. Once again, thanks to the hard work and dedication of their white savior, Mrs. Gruelle. The film itself presents a very, very inspiring storyline. Once we flip the switch and look at it through the white savior complex lens, you can really see how Miss Gruelle plays the role of the white savior, while the minority student being saved by their white savior counterpart. Another reason why I chose to investigate this film in particular was because a really interesting research project was conducted on this film.
Research by Matthew W. Huey at Mississippi State University brought up an intriguing perspective that explains why films are a major influence in generating views of race. He investigated over 100 movie reviews and how their interpretations associated with the film served as supposedly common sense mappings of today's racial landscape. What he found by analyzing the film reviews was that interpretations often equate non-whites with pathological and dysfunctional traits, while hard work was seen as a white normative characteristic. He also found that out of the 113 reviews, 108 of the reviews spoke of the students in the film as dysfunctional, criminals, degenerates, or illiterate. Meanwhile, the reviews regarding Miss Gruelle were referenced with words and phrases such as devoted or committed. In 30.3% of the reviews, the racism, prejudice, and racial hatred of the students were specifically highlighted, yet only 6.7% of the reviews mentioned the racism of the school's officials as important to the story.
Now, where this can start to become an issue is when these students are portrayed with these negative qualities that can be interpreted into an audience's mind that other minorities in the real world also possess the same qualities. When we look at the white savior complex through its historical background, understand how this trend has been ingrained within society for a very long time. More specifically, when we look in terms of European imperialism and American colonialism, we can really see how the white savior complex has been a trend for centuries.
When we look back on the historical context of the white savior complex, there's a strong correlation between the white savior complex and American and European imperialism. One example relates to The White Man's Burden, a poem written by Rudyard Kipling in 1898. This poem aimed to influence the Roosevelt administration to send American forces into the Philippines with the hopes of spreading American ideals to the Filipino people. The poem has been well known throughout history as it demonstrates a time in which America believed they had power over non-white populations, as if it was America's obligation to overrule a whole group of people as if no civilization had been established prior to the American arrival.
We've also seen a very similar instance within the Moors account, when we had the European settlers coming into the new land and trying to enforce their religion, their culture onto the Indians or the Native Americans under the assumption that the natives didn't already have an established culture or identity. The European settlers saw it as their job to introduce these Indians into their civilization. The Europeans didn't even investigate the fact that they had their own identity and automatically try to force their culture onto the Indian people. With all that being said, I'd like to look at the white savior complex on a global scale, specifically regarding how the white savior complex can exist within global aid organizations as well as volunteering in their foreign countries. We have a lot of instances where celebrities will go into these underdeveloped countries and try to help the people of these countries by giving them money, take photos, and try to present people from underdeveloped countries as desperate and in need in order to evoke emotion within their fan base, hoping that their fans will contribute to whatever cause they are promoting. One example of this happened in 2013 with no other than Madonna.
In 2013, Madonna began her charity Raising Malawi, which she sought to decrease poverty rates and built a $15 million academy for young girls. Although her intentions were good, the actual implementation was not as successful as hoped. Many issues arose between her and the president of Malawi at the time, as rumors began to spread that Madonna created this organization to receive an abundance of praise and worship from the citizens of Malawi.
Another example of celebrity help in foreign countries, more specifically African countries, is Ashton Kutcher.
In 2009, Ashton Kutcher had partnered with the Malaria No More campaign. Kutcher had challenged his fans that if he had reached 1 million followers on Twitter and surpassed the number of followers of the news network CNN, he would donate 10,000 mosquito nets to the Malaria No More organization for Africa.
This, I think, can be beneficial in the sense that it was fairly easy for him to hit 1 million followers, and then those mosquito nets would be going to people in Africa. But the fishy aspect of all of this is how it showcases the people in Africa as objects. It could be seen that Kutcher used this organization to promote himself, and using the people of Africa who are going through a tough time as a way to gain followers. I stumbled upon a really interesting podcast by the nonprofit Quarterly, which included an interview with Teddy Rouge. Teddy Rouge is a Ugandan-born entrepreneur and writer. He brought up some really significant insight as to what celebrity interference on developing countries can do to the people who live within the countries.
In a podcast with Amy Costello, he expresses that it makes it impossible for people to get on their own 2 feet. Young people in Uganda will be faced with the idea that they are unable to provide for themselves, that they could grow up thinking that they have no agency, that someone in a white van, most likely a white person, is responsible for their education, for their health system, for their shoes, and for their shirts. We should be empowering the youth to be saying, I'm an agent for change in my community.
Again, Ashton Kutcher and Madonna are playing the role of the white savior, while the people in the African countries in which they're trying to help, they can be seen as incapable of helping themselves, and it can be very, very detrimental, as now young generations within these developing countries, they can get the impression that they can only be saved when someone who happens to be white comes into the country and helps them. So what's the takeaway from all of this? I was first introduced to the term white savior complex when I was enrolled in a global academy course in preparation for my study abroad in South Africa. In South Africa, we were to work with a volunteer organization called GVI, or Global Visions International. And GVI had given us so many presentations relating to responsible volunteerism. And all the presentations were related to how we as Americans shouldn't go into South Africa thinking that we were going to change the lives of the individuals we are working with. Rather, we were going in to empower the people we were working with. More specifically, we worked within the Women's Leadership Program and the elementary schools. In the Women's Leadership Program, we sat down with individuals who had never worked with Microsoft Word or Excel or PowerPoint, and we taught them skills and techniques that they could use on computers to make them more competitive within the job field. And what we were doing, we're teaching them skills that would help them achieve a job, go off into the workforce, and become more contributing individuals within their community. At the elementary schools, we were working with young students in their physical education department, and with that, we would be doing drills, playing soccer, playing baseball, and we would help the students practice skills that would benefit them on their upcoming physical tests. Not saving them from anything, but rather empowering them so they're able to develop skills that would help them later down the road. Another thing that we were introduced to within the course was the idea that the individuals that we were going to see on the trip were people before anything else. While they lived in conditions in which we were unfamiliar with, being from TCU, we were never see them as less than ourselves. They were happy despite how their living conditions appeared. To us, being from this university, our conditions on campus are so different than what the locals in South Africa lived in. Despite how different our lives were, there was no life better than the other. There should never be an instance where one group overrides another group. All cultures exist the way that they exist. All in all, the white savior complex is an extremely significant aspect of our civilization as it exists today. There's so many different groups within our world that it's really important to recognize how no culture, no race is better than another. While I think it's great for us to come together to help one another, there should never be an instance where we feel inclined to save another individual under the assumption that that individual cannot save themselves.